So I think we have like tons of things going on today. It's like
Yeah,
kind of a mess. Did you get to eat your lunch?
I did. Yeah. Did you
Okay.
end up grabbing a bite or no?
I have a banana and I have a bowl of blueberries
Nice. I'm glad
and
you did lunch break.
Jen made some homemade cookies.
That's so nice. I
So
want homemade cookies.
yeah, I think she was making like chocolate chip cookies or something, but then she was missing some core ingredient. Maybe I'm not even sure all of what would be required, but we had these packets of like hot cocoa that somehow made their way into these
That's such a
cookies
good
as
idea.
some sort
Wow.
of cookie flavoring.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's
we
so
have
smart.
these. Yeah, they're
I have
quite
so many
tasty,
of
but they
those
do.
packets lying around.
You do have?
I have so many like hot chocolate packets lying
Oh
around,
yeah,
but I don't drink hot chocolate really, so I think that's a great use of
right.
them. Might
I
have
think
to
that's
steal.
kind of us too. We don't normally drink hot chocolate, but putting them in cookies seems
Yeah,
like a good idea.
yeah.
Um, so before we go to our regularly scheduled programming, I wanted to check because I got an email back from somebody. Okay, so we have a confirmation of a special guest on Friday. I don't want to pre-announce it, but I just want to make sure in the email that wasn't happening today.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, I saw that. Very
You
excited.
see, you're on the email, yeah. So
Yeah.
that'll be a good one. Wahahaha. Nobody.
Stay tuned, whoever is watching this.
All of nobody who are watching this will not be in on our little secret. Oh,
One
I
day,
saw.
when you, like Chamath, run for governor, these videos will come
I spelled Boaha wrong.
out. Everyone will
Boaha.
know that you eat chocolate chip cookies for lunch.
Okay, good. So we've got, all right, we've got all of our, it feels so freeing to know that we're just going to create highlights when good things happen. So then we don't always have to be trying to make good things happen.
Yeah, exactly. It does alleviate a lot. Like, I don't know, I think that's actually a big deal. I feel like going live is such a momentous moment otherwise for almost anything else you can imagine.
Hmm.
But this feels very casual.
So, and did I add these to Discover properly? I did. Okay, I just want to make sure that was. Yeah, that's officially live now. So, did you have anything in particular that you were looking at? You mentioned Chamath. Were you sort of reading about? I didn't catch much of that today.
That was one thing I'm intrigued by for sure. And then it looks like Nathan had a big announcement about
Oh yeah.
every, which I also have. Oops, some Twitter ad just started playing. Which I also haven't read properly the announcement, but that seems pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
So
those are
those would
both
be like
things
big
I'd like
Twitter
to
topics of the day.
read about and learn about. There's a quick one I'll share. I'm sort of obsessed with these Oren Hoffman little diagrams. I thought the one today is really clever and interesting.
How true do you think that is?
Yeah, he said you're only distantly related to your past self. Um, I mean, I'm intrigued by this idea. I think, I mean, there's so so many like kind of philosophical questions that, you know, opening yourself up to this idea can generate. I think it's actually, you know, I don't know if like the specific date and time and age ranges are, you know, exactly right, but I think the sentiment feels about right and not something that I've really thought that much about before. You know, being, you know, somewhere right now, I'm somewhere in between being like a sibling and being like a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or I guess, yeah, similarity to myself at age 20. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like very different, I'd say. I mean, there's certainly some similarities, but yeah, somewhere in that, I wouldn't, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't argue that I'm so distant that I'm just a good friend. Like I'm more like a sibling of my 20-year-old self, I'd say.
Yeah.
So it does feel like you know, I don't know, it does feel kind of similar. The sibling thing around 30 does seem about right. Like you kind of, you know,
From like what age to what age, say starting at like, I don't know, maybe at college freshman DK onwards, do you think it changed the most?
Yeah, I guess there's so many different kind of axes of change, but you know, I think it feels like it feels like the pace of change is still very quick. Like the, you know, I don't, I think I won't, you know, like a year from now, I don't think I'll recognize myself today in a sense, right? Whereas, whereas I
In
think,
what sense though? Like, I feel like, I mean, this is a very interesting philosophical
yeah,
question of like identity and kind of how that changes or does not change over time. But in a way, like for myself, I feel like the core pillars that I really care about have really not changed that much. Some aspects of my personality I feel like have, like growing more confident in some areas, blah blah blah. Like obviously becoming smarter and more informed. But in what senses do you feel like year to year there would be the most change?
like I think one thing in the last 10 years is I've become like, I would say I've always been more, I guess, more excited about process than outcome. Let's say, like I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something I've held for a long time. But I think I'm like even more removed today from outcome versus process. And what I mean by that is like like when Jen, you know, when Jen and I are out, you know, doing some long trail run, I'm kind of just in the moment of getting the next foot forward, climbing the next ridge, and really not assessing like, well, how does this, you know, how does this feel as an accomplishment for the day? How does this fit into my accomplishment for the week? Am I moving toward my yearly goals of, you know, accomplishing something? I feel like I'm, you know, overall, any endeavor of life, much more focused on like the moment and the process surrounding that moment than, you know, than sort of like how it fits into like a broader thing. And I don't know, even is that, I'm now thinking about that, I don't know if it's like intentional or I sort of like, yeah, I'm not sure. How does that idea fit with you? Do you sort of see those ideas, or do you recognize those in yourself, or do they feel like they change?
I think that's always like the golden goal in a sense. Like if you look at a lot of different spiritual traditions, even, and like the teachings of various philosophical works over time, it's kind of all about living more and more in the present and being more and more kind of attuned to process. and aware of what is going on and how it makes you feel versus pre-planning many steps in advance and agonizing over the past or the future. So I feel like it's a very slow climb getting there.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those areas I feel like I have gotten better with over time, but I'm not sure that I'm completely there. Slash, sometimes it's difficult to tell because if you're having kind of like a good, agreeable period in your life, then
Mm-hmm.
you're not really facing the moments where you would be able to discern, am I too obsessive over the past or the future?
Right. One perspective that my guess is not maybe is not kind of commonly. I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure how people experience this, but I think I probably have in life had less. I guess like I imagined that life goes forever. I think, especially when I was young, I imagined it goes on forever. I think that's probably kind of typical. Like you never see any. It's like everybody around you. You've never seen an end of life, or so it's very rare, and
Yeah.
it's
Wait, what was the thing that you said before that? Mine just cut out for a second. You said,
just that you sort of always had this feeling that life goes on forever.
yeah,
So I think as you age and maybe you lose family members, grandparents, parents, I think it becomes more, these are like people and there's more of them who you see go through this. And I think it actually shortens the assumption about the length of life.
Do you think that you become more attuned to process, or it makes it more difficult because you're kind of thinking further in advance?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a good question. I think being attuned to process versus outcome. I mean, I really had. I think I probably had like a very unnatural relationship with time. I'm not sure how common this would be, but I really felt like everything was infinite in a sense, which is not. I think it's different than saying like life goes on forever, but just like if you think about, say, like let's say a successful technology platform, I think I would have said this is forever a piece of the world, and a piece of content on that platform may have a more moderate life or modest life. Yeah. But I sort of had this view of like infinite versus limited, and it would shape in different ways. But like even, the greatest technology platform in the world probably doesn't live forever. It's like it has an arc, and it's maybe an arc that maybe it outlasts a human life. But it's not infinite actually, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I was, a freshman in college, I don't think, I felt maybe I just felt like if we can build these great new technologies, they're like, in a sense, a form of immortality. Not that I was super focused on immortality because, life felt infinite anyway, but it felt like technology was a way to like transcend to the immortal. And, and so then like, I think that makes outcomes and goals more important.
Yeah.
If you're focusing a lot of your energy on building technologies, then it makes it more important. I think maybe it's that now that is more clearly not the case to me, then like, in a sense, like, what are we doing today? Is it working on the right thing? Is it with good people? Are we enjoying the process? I think maybe that's part of it, but then it applies to trail running and other things too. So
yeah, it's almost like the more you zoom out, the more insignificant any one thing that anyone does seems, which makes it almost, I mean, I guess it makes it easier to either be a complete nihilist, or hopefully that's the minority of people's reactions, but to kind of think about like change and the cascading impact of your actions on a very immediate, day-to-day, granular level, instead of having overly broad goals that could be good or bad and then cause you to potentially stress a lot.
Right. And I look at people in my life who I know who are, I mean, I have certain friends who are like, I'd say, really focused on being present and training their mind and breathing and all kinds of different approaches to like, and I think when I'm around them, I feel, you know, I'm like, oh, I want to be that. That's like next level. It's not, you know, I'm still too much of a practitioner of life instead of, you know, what I don't know what you'd call what they're doing. I'm not sure how to create the right, or, you know, articulate the dichotomy that I have in mind here. But I think there's something that, you know, there's something outside of me that I look at and appreciate. And then I wonder, like, I'm somewhere in this continuum of like, I used to be much further. Now I'm like somewhere in between. And so I think Oren's graph, you know, does seem, you know, I think it's like there's a lot wrapped up in there. It's like a very astute insight that he communicates in this simple picture.
Yeah.
I'm kind of obsessed with these graphs. I mean,
it's definitely a lot of thought in this tiny kind of like couple inches of a page. I think the most interesting thing about this is like on what dimensions are we thinking about similarity and difference? Is it like core values, or is it thought process, or like there's so many different, it's almost like your interpretation of what constitutes similarity or difference also says a lot about kind of how you are prioritizing different things or living your life.
Right. Yeah.
Like you kind of jumped to process and mindset, but someone might look at that and think about like, I don't know, like wealth or I don't know, like power or social connections or any amount of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about, you know, you're talking about about changes relative to freshman year, I think you said, right? I think I had a much more, I don't know what you'd call it, almost like a soloist approach to things before.
In what way?
I think I had more of a sense of, I think I had less of a sense of how to incorporate people into my world in a way that, you know, and for me to be incorporated into their world in a way that like we all collaborate. I think that was not as clear to me. So I think I felt more like if I was going to do something, I had to be able to do everything. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think actually it took quite a while to really, I mean, I think I see it like a vastly different way today. I feel like it's all, you know, if you want to accomplish anything in the world, it's all about the people that you're working with to accomplish something. And it's, you know, it's just, you know, one life, one, you know, input of effort cannot achieve anything really.
Yeah.
You know? And that, I think that was like, you know, a big change from, and I think, you know, I can tell, you know, I could probably point to specific things in my childhood that would have informed that, you know, false view or that view that I wouldn't agree with today.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah, I think that's a very telling one, like meaning a very stark contrast with my past self.
Yeah. Do you think that's a common thing amongst a lot of people who ended up, or I guess were like early San Francisco kind of like tech entrepreneur types? Like, do you think that the parallel in your own mindset kind of also applies to people who are attracted to founding companies then versus now? I wonder if there's more of a, like, there's so many more ways to collaborate and people are collaborating and working in public and all of these sorts of things online, that I wonder if kind of this like myth of the solo genius founder is lessening a little bit, which is probably a good thing.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I think it's true that the recent kind of, I think working public is a great example, and there's probably, undercurrents of those ideas that have been around since, that have been around a lot longer in public online than kind of the particular phrase. So like, yeah, I think it's more, actually, maybe that's it. Maybe it's the fact that so much can happen in public and you actually get visibility into what might have been private collaborations before that now are in public, and you can see how the public collaborations actually help lift up everybody.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put myself fully in the mindset of like the 20 years ago version of San Francisco. It's hard to see that all, but I feel like the world is moving towards more transparency and more public collaboration, which shows people how impactful kind of, I don't know what you call it, your tribe or your crew or your group is to, actually doing something unique and new. And I mean, I think like look at what Nathan is doing. That I think is a perfect example of, he kind of started, I mean, even just years ago, he was a little bit more of a lone wolf, creating things online that were not necessarily his writing, and then he was a bit of a lone wolf as a writer. And I think that's another area that we probably have, like, historical, social narratives around, the lone genius, whether it's entrepreneur or writer or like, sculptor or craftsman, like people who create are often, I think we have narratives that suggest these are more single individual endeavors, which I think maybe probably limit, it's better to see it all in public and see that these are actually, if you're going to take these monumental undertakings, it's really, groups of people who are all passionate together, who are working together to achieve something.
Yeah.
I think Nathan, I mean, I haven't obviously talked to him specifically about this, but I would say he started as a lone wolf writer, and, and that's probably a fine way to start. But then I think quickly he figured out, if he and Dan Schipper work together, then they can accomplish more together than they do individually. And then I haven't read all the details of the latest announcement, but I think with the Everything bundle, or is it called
more of a writers collective? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is almost like that same process of discovery. I think there's also like I think the path here makes sense. Like, I think it would be weird to just be like, okay, Nathan is just going to, like, I don't know, out of thin air, bring a bunch of people together for the purpose of being, writers together. Yeah. Like, there almost like the seed of his lone wolf activities probably helped even clarify that working with Dan would have been a good idea, and then further clarify that working with, even broader community. And I think like the, stuff with like the, the Telegram groups and stuff, probably, kind of creator houses and stuff are more showcasing of that. But it seems like it's a great thing for people to grow up understanding the value of collaboration more. And I think, it feels like it was kind of a less, I think it was like, maybe I wouldn't even think of it as San Francisco specific or, tech entrepreneurship specific, but I think like it was probably just a less common narrative 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think shifting away from this myth of the like lone genius founder or creative or writer is really important, because it also drives away so many people, especially minorities, I think, who just have less visibility into the reality that a lot of these like genius types did have so much infrastructure around them and people helping them, whether it was implicitly or explicitly. And I think a lot of people get discouraged seeing that and being like, well, I'm not a prodigy, or like, I'm not that smart, so I'm not even going to try.
Right.
But with working in public and kind of like elevating collectives, like the thing that Nathan's doing, collectives of writers, and showing that like everyone is sort of like stitching together their work into this fabric that includes
Yeah.
other people, I think it'll be like uplifting for the ecosystem overall, for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think the thing you're pointing out is that it actually can help be a gateway to new types of ideas and thinkers, and can kind of help people, help people who might have been excluded in the previous version actually understand they can do this.
Yeah.
And I think it actually also focuses on what are the skill sets that help people achieve things, right? So I think if you think about like, what is the skill set to create an important blog, well, or like kind of like what Nathan is doing. Nathan probably, I think he was writing in a sense to take a break from like some product stuff he'd been working on that wasn't really working, or didn't have like super strong signal on the product stuff. So I think he was kind of like writing as a little bit of a escape from that, or like a just take a breather in space. But he kind of discovered that, and then kind of discovered these bits along the way. But if you know that there's value in, I mean, like actually take like what Jen is doing with Renaissance Collective. I think she started Renaissance Collective as a way to bring people together around a specific purpose. And, I guess, we could ask her, but I wouldn't even describe that her motivation was very directed, besides saying like, look, I had trouble connecting to kind of the technology ecosystem, and it took me 5 years, and it shouldn't take other people 5 years. You should be able to do that in 3 months if you have the right support structures and networks. And I think that kind of thing, I think that kind of thing is, I think if you said that there's like gatekeepers, it's like, okay, is this a technology company? Then you need to go down this path. And first step is define the product, and second step is raise venture capital, and third step is start building it. I think you just end up kind of in a bad place. Like you wouldn't sort of discover these things. But I think one of the things that worked about Renaissance Collective, and especially in the early days of it, is she didn't have a prototype or like an archetype of what she was doing. She wasn't saying, okay, I need to fit into the San Francisco entrepreneur thing because it's not clear, is it a community or nonprofit or a commercial entity? She was just kind of like really focused on trying to help people in this way. And so I think that speaks to a little bit of like the, can you get, in a sense, more diverse attempts or diverse approaches or people involved in an ecosystem. And I think the skills differ too. If you imagine you need to be a lone wolf to get it started, maybe you would say, I will only do things that I'm good at as a lone wolf. Like maybe Nathan is, he likes to write every day. And so it's hard to create a collective of writers if you don't write every day. Well, possibly, but maybe there are other ways to do it. Maybe having a different purpose and getting people together and then discovering, collective needs together, is an alternative way.
And filling in each other's kind of weak spots or areas of lower interest. Like I didn't read everything too carefully, but one part that was interesting was, I think if it was something like, if you're interested in the business part of publications, but not necessarily the writing, we can help you find someone who's really interested in the writing part, not the business, and kind of like make these mutually beneficial alliances almost between writers that then the result is like another great newsletter in the world that wouldn't have existed otherwise, or might have existed but not gotten any visibility otherwise. So then like compounding on people's skills.
Right. Yeah, I think if you can show that there are, like you mentioned, sort of the dichotomy between maybe people who are writers versus business skills that they might bring to like the writing or publishing environment. I think if you can show people that there are ways to contribute and lead even without the skills that they might, as an outsider, assume are the core skills.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean outsider, like, I don't mean like, I think it's nice the more people that can be on the frontier of ability to create and contribute and collaborate.
Yeah.
But even somebody, you know, somebody who may be, you know, an outsider to like a news creation or media creation or publishing system, like, I mean, they wouldn't consider themselves, you know, next up for a role at the Wall Street Journal, right? Because they're not sort of in journalism, but they actually probably have some access point within something like, you know, Everything Bundle, or I think, is it called Every now is the new brand?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So if it's, you know, there is some way to contribute to that ecosystem, you probably have a lot more people who would look at that and see themselves and say, that's me. That seems like something that I could do.
Yeah. And just reducing so much friction, like even if you are good at you think you have enough skills to take care of the writing aspect of the business and the marketing, and like, I mean, as an independent creator, you're basically running like a tiny business that is your work. And that's a lot. And I think like Substack and other kind of platforms have been exploring, okay, how do we lessen the burden of that a little bit? Like giving people advances or helping them with legal fees and stuff, or providing them with mentors. But it seems like a really natural way to form kind of like this collective system where it's like at a more fundamental level, the stitching together of people's kind of talents and interests.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting. Actually, there's a lot of the parallels of this kind of stitching that I think exists in the world and is, you know, latent, and sort of there's some narrative bias against it. So like, I bet there are people who would be great contributors and collaborators in every, you know, to something, whether it's business skills or maybe there's some operational skills that they could hone, or, you know, maybe they're a writer. But I bet there's a topic area that, you know, Nathan can see, and he's like, wow, if somebody wanted to go deep on this, they would just crush it. It's just so obvious to me from where I sit and what I see.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody who would love a little bit of guidance. If they could get a little bit of a nudge in the right direction, it could be like a career-making move. And I think there's a narrative that says, oh, like, people should just experiment with whatever they feel like, and if they actually are passionate about it, they'll figure it out. And I think the world is not anywhere near efficient enough for that.
Yeah. And the successful people kind of do what you're saying anyway, right? Like, you might be following the right 100 people on Twitter, and that's how you kind of get the pulse of like what ideas are important. And maybe you're able to hop on that and build a great publication, but not everyone has that access or is in that kind of inner circle of, I mean, the audience that they want to reach or the people they want to write about. Yeah. So again, back to this theme of like uplifting the ecosystem overall by like providing opportunity to people who are not just intrinsically plugged in the right ways. Right. But could really be like standout authors. I think that's a really awesome way to think about it.
Right. And I think all you need is like a little bit of a nudge, almost like a nudge with like a little bit of permission, in a sense. Like I think Paul Graham gave a lot of nudges and a lot of permission that is kind of papered over today, that people don't, you know, it's not really part of the story. Because I think a very common story is like, I mean, you look at Y Combinator today, it's like, okay, you have to have like a lot of traction in order to get in, and you have like your idea and traction, and they're going to like accelerate you to success. And sure, that's, you know, I think largely the role that they play, and they're really good at it. But I think the very early Y Combinator was, you know, it was like a bunch of people at, you know, Paul Graham's house having a barbecue, talking about various ideas, and sometimes they would change the idea the day before demo day, and they'd pitch something totally different that wasn't built at all. And it was much more of this like primordial soup of startup energy. And I think he sort of provided air cover to say like, hey, at least this is something that we can all do together. And people who might not have seen themselves as able to create something, he kind of said like, you know, I believe in you, and I think and there's other people who you can be kind of in this community with. And so I think those are important features of creation that, are underappreciated. Even if I recall correctly, I think there are a few of the, reasonable. I think there's several things at YC that I wouldn't say they were like fully incepted by Paul Graham as an idea, but it was like, what if you explored something over there, kind of like that, right? And I think there's a few of those that have gone on to some amount of success. I don't want to misquote or misattribute, but I think like that kind of connection and air cover, I think really helps a lot of helps people grow and helps people create. And yeah, so I think people may have a bias to say, look, like if I were a writer, then I would already know what to write about. And I bet Nathan can sit there and say, you know what? I bet just my nose suggests that there's something in this space because we're in these other adjacents and there's a lot of energy there and it's different enough. And I bet he could actually help somebody who like comes with, maybe they have like maybe super high, mental horsepower.
Yeah.
Just really like great thinking skills and great like raw writing skills, but they don't have like a blog. They don't have a famous blog at all. Maybe just a minor blog, and they don't have an audience, and they don't necessarily, they're not connected to the fact that this particular idea is among an interesting candidate set to explore.
Yeah.
So it feels like those kinds of, I think we in the world have a bias against that because we think of it as like somehow unnatural, or it's unnatural for Nathan to incept an idea to get somebody excited about something that they don't otherwise discover on their own. I think that's kind of like a bad bias for us as a humanity to hold.
Yeah.
Because I think it's limiting.
Yeah.
Has he talked in the new announcement about any of the efforts that, any new initiatives or stuff that they might be doing to?
I'm not sure. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, let's introducing Every. So are you on the every.2/letter?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll share the link.
I like this part. When you put all these forces together, an arena that requires multiple skills to succeed, the incessant pressure to publish, and the human tendency to chase clout, you end up with a lot of writing that's kind of like cotton candy. It tastes good at first, but it gives you a stomachache after a while. It creates a narrative ecosystem that rewards folks who already have money and an audience rather than reflecting the best of what our community wants to know about the world. I actually think about that a lot with people who are launching individual Substack newsletters, especially the high frequency ones.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the problems of burnout, but almost the impossibility of, I mean, this is kind of like the woe of any full-time creator, but as soon as your hobby becomes your job and then like you have to publish or create something 3 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost like impossible to maintain that bar. Oh,
Right.
we have someone here. Hi,
Do you know Amir?
No.
I know Amir. He's so
Editor at the information. I'm sure he has a lot of thoughts about this stuff.
Right, exactly. So, Amir, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Long time.
Hi.
Good.
Hi. Hello. Who?
This is Mishti. Have you met
Nice
Mishti
to meet
before?
you.
Hi, I don't think so. How's it
So
going?
Mishti and I, we run this TV show on the web every day at noon, where we just read Twitter and talk about it together. We share links and stuff.
Right on.
So we were talking about this the Every thing that Nathan launched today. Did you see that or read about it? Are you familiar with it?
No.
Oh, how did you find us?
I think I came across your profile at some point, and I was like, I wanted to see what you were building. Because the last time I saw you, you were interested. We were talking at an event, and you were talking about discussions and useful discussions about various topics, and just getting smart people together to talk thoughtfully about different things.
Yeah.
So
this was
like
when
Curious Conversations?
This was Curious Conversations, right? This was, I think we were hanging out at that church, retrofitted church party thing. I mean,
right
off Dolores Park.
Yes, yeah.
And Sam Lesson the information was hosting, right? It was,
I think, was there a company called Blockchain or something? I can't remember. There was a crypto company.
It sounds very reasonable.
Yeah. a crypto startup that was hosting.
Right.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So we had been, organizing those Curious Conversations groups offline. I don't know if you had ever been to our sessions. We were just talking about it, I guess, at that session.
Okay. No, I don't think so.
Okay. So it was kind of in a room. We would host, somebody who's building something. Oftentimes it was kind of Bitcoin or crypto related. And, we'd bring on a guest and curate an audience full of people that we knew. And it was just kind of a little bit of a learning session and party. A bunch of us would hang out and all learn together and ask questions. It was a lot of fun.
Is this an outgrowth of that?
Yeah. I mean, years later. Yeah. So this,
full circle.
we started this with the idea that there's just a lot of energy around that thing, because people were asking like, oh, can you pipe it through to Skype or something? And that didn't make a lot of sense for kind of the structure of how we were doing things. And we weren't really structured as like a proper media production entity. But certainly like it tickles a lot of the same, nerves that did. And, I think I've always enjoyed, invite somebody in and talk about something cool. And like, that's my favorite way to learn. So I've been doing that for years. And then we sort of were doing book club version of this idea. And I think that one was a useful starting point. But what we found is just like, we like to host these things. We were hosting them on Zoom like last year and found they were super fun, but Zoom wasn't sufficient for everything we wanted to accomplish. So we ended up building a more custom thing here. But I thought you maybe popped in because we were talking about writing and the future of writing and how publications and unbundling and journalists work.
Oh.
So I think when we first met, so do you know Nathan Bashez?
I don't think so.
He's kind of one of the more prominent kind of Substack writers. So he's sort of built that up over the last few years. And I think back to when we first met, I think it was actually just around the corner from that church where we were hanging out. Was it Ritual Roasters?
Right,
Valencia.
Who was it with? The founder of Abacus.
Abacus,
yeah. Bindu. We're hanging out with Bindu Reddy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I knew her at Google, but I don't recall.
I thought she was there because I think maybe you were randomly saw her there, but she was definitely there.
I thought Elad had connected us because you were moving from New York to San Francisco to cover the tech beat for Wall Street Journal. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. But I think I went there to see. It wasn't the first time I saw you, I don't think, but I think she was there and you introduced us there.
Oh, cool.
So that's why I remember. The beauty of like serendipity.
San Francisco. Are you still in San Francisco?
I'm in Marin, actually. I moved up to Marin 3 years ago.
Are you guys whereabouts?
It's technically San Anselmo, but on the border with an unincorporated area called Sleepy Hollow.
Oh yeah.
So there's like it's sort of like a valley.
Oh yeah.
Kind of gray skies now, but it's a cute little valley that it's been a decent place to be.
So good
for us.
I would guess 80% chance that we're in the neighborhood, somewhere around there within I don't know 6 months.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's been hot. I think real estate prices have started to go up after being flat for a while. We thought we bought at the top. And how do you know Mishti? How do you guys know each other?
So Mishti and I met through
another serendipitous story.
That's another one. Yeah, you want to tell it?
Yeah, kind of through so Jen, DK's wife Jen, is building this like amazing community of generalists kind of interested in careers in tech, and I was looking to move from, I was doing like institutional investing basically, and always had been interested in more creative work and also kind of the startup world. So I joined Renko, and then through that, I think I happened to be on a work trip to San Francisco visiting some of our venture managers, and there was a Renko event at the same time that I dropped into, and we ended up getting like burritos afterwards. And I ended up sitting right next to DK. So that's how we met. And I remember at that point, I was just asking for like advice and bouncing around a bunch of different kind of startup ideas I had of my own. And we sort of like stayed in touch for a little bit. And then it was probably like 5 months later that we even started talking about Highlighter. So just kind of
Highlighter. Okay, I get it. So Highlighter, okay, I think I understand the name now. The connection to like highlighting important things in books and other material. Okay.
Yeah. So the name it's actually not probably as clear in this version of it yet because the actual highlighting feature isn't present. But we built a bunch of highlighting tools over the years, and one of them was this OCR highlighter where you could take you could take a mobile phone, take a photo of a page of a book, and you could highlight a passage and sort of remember it, describe it, and collaborate with other people who are interested in that same book. So that was like a version of Highlighter. But we think of Highlighter and highlighting as like a new atomic unit of information. And so that could be across a book, could be across, a podcast, it could be a web page. And what we've done here is we've actually built kind of this kind of video experience that helps us, come together, learn together, discuss things. And we're building a highlighter for all of this discussion that we're having so that we'd be able to actually, sometimes Mishti makes these, even though they don't have the tool fully built, but grab a section of a discussion that you're having and kind of, you can highlight the specific idea that we find compelling, that we want to sort of dig deeper into, that we might want to share out with other people.
Okay, and I sorry I cut you off earlier because you were mentioning the Substack writer.
Oh yeah, Nathan. So Nathan, has been sort of doing the Substack thing for a few years and sort of built up, kind of an independent, author audience. And along the way, he decided to pair with another guy, Dan Shipper, who had been doing similar, and sort of they'd each built their independent audiences. They came together and built something called the Everything Bundle. And so they then bundle their audiences and topics, and then they started to incorporate even more people into the Everything Bundle. And so there's more topics and more people around. And then those, I think just today they've, made a big announcement that they've rebranded the Everything Bundle to Every, and they are launching it as like a writers collective, and they're sort of exploring a bunch of new things about how kind of writing in the future and journalism, could work in, enabling new types of voices to get incorporated who are maybe not the traditional kind of professional, types and professional publications. So we were just reading through his work. So maybe when you showed up, we were actually in our reading mode.
Sorry.
No, it's totally
No, you're good. I think we pretty much finished, and we were starting to talk about some of these things. I think we linked it in chat, right? Like this was the announcement post that he made. I just put it up there.
Okay.
So many interesting themes here that I'm sure you also have experience with and probably have a lot to say about. But we were kind of talking about this idea of the collective being so important for people who either don't have the bandwidth to do everything that's involved in being a solo writer, like the business, the writing, the marketing, building up a social media presence all at once. It sort of allows people to patch in their skills with others and create a lot of content in the world that would have not been there otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I had so I had one comment to make, and I wanted to see what you thought about it, and then I had a general question for you that I'm also wondering about as I see this. When it comes to this phenomenon of unbundling and or rebundling, or of more voices getting out there, it seems like some of that is sometimes more geared toward analysis and commentary as opposed to unearthing brand new information. So it's more about connecting the dots for people as opposed to, getting brand new information out there that, so it's less kind of reporting. Now, there are some folks who do use it as a reporting platform, but it's by definition a little bit harder to do that.
You to unearth the new information is tougher for the new voices.
Well, it's tougher to work on ambitious, long, kind of deep investigative pieces if you have to kind of constantly, put out content. Some people can do it. Don't get me wrong. But I think Ben Thompson obviously is one of the best examples of kind of pure analysis and commentary. He's not a reporter. He's just soaking it in and then helping you understand where it fits and sits. So it seems like the era that we're in is a little bit more about that than it is about generating brand new information.
Right.
But what do you think? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I was gonna mention Ben Thompson because I think I do find I find that Ben Thompson is some of my favorite writing on the internet, and then the information is some of my favorite writing on the internet, and they have some patterns that are similar, but then some patterns that are very different, right? And I think if I understand correctly, the way you describe the Ben Thompson thing is sort of he's kind of connecting dots from otherwise publicly available information, and he's sort of connecting dots and expressing in a new way. And then the information, because it's a bigger platform and can invest, there's sort of more people, it's more like a newsroom. You can actually invest in uncovering new knowledge and information that it doesn't exist in the world anywhere. And then you can also overlay those connections on top of it. So it's not, they're like kind of very different endeavors. And if I understand correctly, then the Substack, kind of the everything, the new brand that Nathan is launching is actually more like maybe an at scale, or like a certain sort of like an ambitious networked version of what Ben Thompson is doing. Is that kind of?
Well, I don't know. I'll have to see, but these are not kind of, by definition, these are not news publications, right? They're, like you said, they're voices, right? They're like somebody's letting you into their brain and into their thought process and into the theories that they come up with, or the patterns that they start to recognize, which is hugely valuable. I'm a big fan of all of it.
I see contours differently from how, like, maybe this is, I know your professional career at Wall Street Journal was maybe far enough ago that it's, I don't know how much you keep in touch with that world, but it seems like some of the themes of what the differences between kind of the information's approach to journalism versus Wall Street Journal, that information I would maybe describe as a little more like, maybe a little more internet-y, if that's a reasonable word. It's more.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly overlap, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like, you're more like when, so when we heard about, sorry, this is probably a really dumb example, but like when we heard about Andreessen Horowitz working on this like new publication, we were super interested in that for so many different reasons. And, it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating firm, right? And so we look at venture firms like Andreessen, Sequoia, Benchmark founders, and we're like, okay, these are the big four of the major VCs. Like, we should probably cover them like companies, right? Like, they're so influential. They do so much behind the scenes. There's so much action happening that probably doesn't really come out. We should really just, like, people care. The bottom line is people care. People are very impacted. And people look at what these firms are doing very closely. So we're a publication that like hears about something like that, and we're like, oh my gosh, like, that's a story. Like, that's super interesting, because, and also it gives us a chance to say, well, and we should probably go deeper on it, but like somebody like Mark Andreessen, has long had frustrations with traditional press, or all press. And I think a lot that makes a lot of sense, right? If you're a builder, and if part of what you're building is building belief in other people in what you're building, right? Take something like crypto, right? Like, it's all about belief, right? You have to have belief. Belief is everything. Naval talks about it all the time. Anytime you insert a little bit of skepticism, or sometimes even cynicism, or just sort of trying to bring a critical lens to it, like people who are building that are they're going to be turned off by that. And somebody like Mark Andreessen is going to be turned off by that, because he's trying to make things happen. He's trying to do things, right? So I just think, like, there's probably a lot more to explore there, but that story, it's a minor story. It's an incremental story. But we're like, okay, well, we have to write about that. And when we do, it, like, people care, and we got a ton of feedback on it, and it's like a whole thing. Whereas the Wall Street Journal, like, that's just, they're not really connected in that same way. They don't, and they have a much broader, older audience that is probably not going to care about that. Although they should. I mean, everyone should care about what's happening here. So, sorry, that was a very long-winded way of saying there are just a lot more topics that we would care much more about, because we just find them to be, like, intellectually interesting. And we know everyone else cares about it, or should care about it. Yeah. Right.
And it sounds like
that's an interesting one too. The whole A16Z kind of media arm build out. I wonder how in your mental framework it fits into writers collectives of kind of more analysis commentary, as you said, and then there's like pure investigative journalism that's funded by these huge players. Like, where in the landscape is something like this going to be?
So, sorry, something like Highlighter?
Something like the A16Z media.
I don't know. I mean, we've heard they actually want to hire a lot of people. I think there's like this this particular opinion thing does not involve hiring a lot of people in house. But I think they definitely have a variety of ambitions. They're not being independent means that you're just incentivized to do different kind of work. So it's all good. I mean, like the more resources there are on, like, writing useful things, whether they're frameworks for how to think about a really complicated topic, or even some of the stuff that, like, Martin Casado has written about AI, I find hugely valuable. I'm so glad he wrote those things, and I go back to them all the time. They're great. They're absolutely great. And so I love seeing this this long tail of content getting longer, because and more people joining. But actually bringing to light Trump's tax returns, or slave labor in the supply chain in China, or forced labor is, it's not like A16Z is not going to touch those things. So, sorry, my main point is the more the merrier. Yeah.
So do you think historically they've operated more like, let's say, if we wanted to box it, more like the independent voices on the internet? Like when Martin Casado writes this thing about AI, is he's using his knowledge and network, but kind of making his own connections and his own creative expression and ideas around that, versus doing a deep dive with certain players from the industry? Is that kind of historically where they've been?
I don't know if I could answer that definitively, but and obviously they had this guy Benedict, who is from the UK. I think he went back. I mean, by definition, they're going to write things that are generally going to be forwarding their investment theses.
Right.
So that's that has a limitation. And I realize, somebody at that firm could look at an operation like the one that I'm in, or look at the New York Times and make similar arguments about whatever it is they think those publications are incentivized to do.
It seems like the business models, having a diversity of business models in, supporting writing will actually create diversity of types of writing, right? It's like, I think these, I've got to imagine that the information, the org charts and the People with Power series are obviously, these must be fantastically successful, because things people are curious about, and these are the companies people are talking about. And it seems like an independent entity, like the information, that has a subscriber relationship as the business model, is going to be different than an A16Z media entity, which has venture capital as a ultimate kind of monetization mechanism. So yeah,
for sure. But
so
go ahead, please.
I would say, are there other? So I think we have the Substack independent voices subscription thing, and then we have the information as like a media entity, or like a news org with subscription based kind of direct pay, and then we have venture capital as another. And I guess there's like the old school ad stuff, but I mean, who cares? That stuff's probably going away or something, right? So what are there other categories of monetization that we haven't seen yet, or that are sort of yet to be discovered or experimented with? Or are there green shoots of things that people are trying that may be interesting soon?
Well, I actually wanted to, this was the thing I was going to ask you about, because you mentioned direct payments and subscriptions and things like that. I'm actually really, really interested. So I remember 5 or 6 years ago, there was this service in still exists, a service in China called YY, and it was all about I don't know. In many cases, it's really good looking people who are doing video broadcasts, and they're being tipped and paid. And I just remember there being a lot of excitement around that, because it was very clear, Chinese internet companies have always innovated on product and business model, and still do today. And that was a great example. I think it was like the most at scale product for paying, let's call it video creators or broadcasters, that I think the world had seen up until that point, I think.
It was mostly content, like it was kind of news anchor type.
No, it was. I think it was all. I can't remember. It still exists, but it's. I think in some cases it was like, I think people just talking up whatever it is that they're interested in. It's kind of like, I don't think it's that different from a YouTube, star or creator talking about fashion or music or whatever it is. But it's usually people who are like, maybe they're musicians, maybe they are just like, I don't know, really good looking or really good at modeling stuff or talking about fashion or whatever it is. And people would like pay directly.
Right.
And it's so interesting that in the West, we've finally seemed to have kind of caught up to this, and in some cases overtaken it with, OnlyFans and Patreon, and I actually think like the Clubhouse move to not do advertising is pretty indicative of this too. Whereas actually, I think Cameo started off with direct payments to these creators, and I think wants to branch into advertising. So maybe that's a counter example. But I am super interested in this, like in this move, and I'm curious. I'm curious to know how big this and Substack obviously being a tangential but related to this. So I definitely was curious what you guys think about that phenomenon, and what that portends. That's what I was about.
Yeah, I guess I already showed my cards with the comment about ads, but it feels to me like new things that are ad supported. I don't see a future where new things get ad supported. It's not to say that existing ad systems can't continue to operate at large scale, sort of like Google's the world and Facebook's the world. But I think for a new service to come up and have kind of a similar business model I just feel like it's like extraordinarily unlikely that kind of the gravity or the weight of the world could be shifted to have a new entrant actually be like, kind of, on a planetary scale successful with advertising. Whereas I think there's so much, you think about like when Google and Facebook started, there just wasn't much commerce infrastructure on the internet. So it was like, if you wanted to do that, you didn't have Stripe wasn't going to come around for another decade. And so even if you wanted to, there's just no viable path. And so I think the thing they kind of got shaped by the era that they were creating grew really big in. And I think we're in an era now when, the Stripes of the world and Apple Pay and, Google Wallet and everything, like these things do exist, and people are online, billions of people are online with financial instruments tied to their online identities. So it seems like, and the economics are much more aligned if you can create alignment between like a person who's on a service caring to use the service and the people who are, creating on the service. So to me, in the card I show, I just think like ads are fine, but they don't. I don't know specifically about Cameo, but it's sort of what their product strategy is, or kind of how serious they are about it. But I can't see how they're going to do that as a scale player. Even their direct pay business seems to be reasonably successful, but like, how do you at scale do enough interesting stuff? And also, you end up going down the same ruts as everybody else, and you're like trying to acquire data through all these third-party dirty data brokers, and like I think it just becomes a mess if you try to do anything, as like a technology platform in advertising today. I would almost, maybe it's a strong claim, but I would almost predict like we don't see another big one.
Yeah, maybe you mean like TikTok is maybe one of the last. Yeah. Maybe I don't know enough about it. Actually, we were talking about this internally. I have a colleague of mine, Zoe, who's interested in exploring these dynamics as well.
I guess another one we haven't mentioned is things like Pop Shop.
Oh yeah,
so
sure.
That probably has some similarities with the YY phenomenon. I know there's a lot of these kind of like live streaming commerce, almost QVC like experiences that are, I think it's early days for these things, but they're, I think, starting to work. And, the behaviors are more human than regional or geographical or cultural. I think, the behavior of like watching people tell you a story and then choosing to buy some things feels like, that's not going away just because we have like new networks and stuff to do it.
Speaking of, there's a startup called Network. That's another one of the pop shops. I think it's like I think it's Network without the vowels or something. I think they're raising right now.
Cool.
Yeah,
Network without the vowels, so NTWRK.
I think so. I think that's it. I've only heard of it verbally.
Shop at the speed of culture.
There you go. There
it is.
One of my colleagues, Malik, is talking to them soon, I think.
Right. So that's interesting. And then that whole phenomenon also, reminds me of other stuff in commerce. Like, have you seen Mischief? Maybe it's the lack of vowels that mischief, like mischievous.
No,
but I think it's like the word mischief without the vowels. MSCHF, I want to say.
Okay.
So yeah, mschf.xyz.
Okay.
So they're like, I'd say they are. I don't know the people directly, but if you look at the site, you look at the aesthetic, they're so biased on like this, like, they have a point of view, and it's almost like, it almost feels like too niche, but it's actually kind of probably the right amount of niche. But it's just like really focused on an audience and a category, and they do these kind of like, internet pop-ups and kind of moments of buying, but you don't look at it and it doesn't feel like you're like shopping at Macy's or Nordstrom or one of these traditional retailers. You feel like you're in this like very unique, it's almost like Nike shoe culture, right? Like, when's the drop?
I see. Yeah, I'm just on the site in the App Store preview. Yeah, no, interesting. I've not heard of this one.
So you were mentioning Network, and you're mentioning how you kind of, that those kinds of ideas flow through, and you end up sort of where you sit, you end up seeing these things early. So I think somebody was probably joking when they said this, but it does make me wonder, like, you probably have early information about the startup ecosystem, and you have a big media brand. Like, are we going to see the information launch a venture capital firm?
No. Again, that would skew our incentives the wrong way. So we can't even own individual stocks. I think we can own a little bit of crypto, but we can't be crypto investors. We can't. I mean, you can't do anything that has any where you have any skin in the game. That's like, that would violate every tenet. But what we have done, actually, I did this thing. I should have called you. I should have called you for it. But we worked on this as a team. It was just trying to make enough phone calls to come up with a list of 50 startups, not like talking to any PR people or marketing people, but just talking to like operators and investors, and just coming up with like 50 startups that had raised like, less than $100 million, or definitely not unicorn valuation yet, although it's becoming harder and harder not to be unicorn.
Right, that's like a seed round these days, right?
Yeah. These things change very quickly around here, as you know. But it was great because like we sort of like came up with these different categories. I focused on enterprise AI, and then one of my colleagues did like enterprise software. So there were all these like observability startups. Like, I think we picked 3 of them. So we had this list of like 50 companies that we thought were like promising and interesting. And we generally had to have kind of like revenue numbers or user numbers or something that like they hadn't necessarily disclosed, or maybe they were choosing to disclose with us for the first time or not. And it's worked out really great because like, I think since we published it last month, I think like 6 or 7 of the companies have already graduated, and it is clearly like a good
awesome.
And so it was a good example of like, all right, like there are a lot of lists of startups out there. Let's just like go a little bit deeper and like try to use our critical thinking skills and like make sure that we're picking companies that we think are really good, and we get kind of buy-in from different people that we know who are telling us, it's a really good company for XYZ reason. And they get this not seed companies, usually post seed. And that's a great example of like, okay, we're here. We
Yep.
know people. Like, we should be able to come up with a great group of companies.
Yep.
And like, it's like a positive thing. These are great companies
Totally.
to look at. Like, and that does incredibly well. Like, it was like the highlight of our December.
Oh yeah.
So I would say that we generally get as much. Like, some of our best stories have been very critical. Whether it's about like Uber in 2017 or something, or Google, culture in general. But like, positive development stories are fantastic too.
And that list that you're mentioning, it's kind of like 100 companies that you compile?
50.
50 companies, yeah. That seems like a really interesting bit. If you sort of say the information is about doing this work to surface new information in the world, and kind of, I guess that's an aggregation and surfacing. But it seems like that as an idea would be valuable, to even new audiences that may not consider themselves traditional information subscribers today. So do you think about like I'm just imagining, somebody who, maybe they, kind of like the Renaissance Collective directive is to take people who, help people who aren't in tech and maybe traditionally would have gone through a business school or something like that, and help them understand, like, what should I be paying attention to? Well, maybe those people aren't connected enough in tech to even know that, that the information is this hub of all of this like proprietary special, information. But maybe there's actually new ways to use the work of surfacing those 50 on some periodic basis, every quarterly or whatever. And that becomes almost like a hub where you can aggregate people who would be, maybe soon to be in the information kind of community or subscriber base, or maybe there's like other types of products that kind of thing would appeal to. Like, I could imagine having like all those people come together and just, you could bring them together in a Slack, and actually it's a great opportunity for people to like discuss and connect and decide if this seems like, hey, what do you think about that one? I don't know, number 37 looks good, but like, I'm really into number 32, Like, how do you think about that from like I don't know if it's a new products perspective or new audiences?
Yeah. So yeah, we did it because we want it to be an annual franchise. So we want it to be like the thing that we update.
Yep.
I don't know that we're going to want to update it more frequently, because it is actually a lot of work. It may not seem it's actually a lot of work. What you're describing, unless I'm totally like blind, this is not supposed to be a conversation about the information, but because I really wanted to ask you guys what you've been reading lately and like what you find useful beyond Ben Thompson. But yeah, that's the sort of thing where like you write something, you put something together, do a project, and then it'll like find its audience. Like that was a great highlight for us in December. It did bring a lot of new people into the door, just because like word of mouth, like that's our bread and butter is word of mouth. Like there's no paid marketing that like really works for what we do.
Right.
It just has to be like good enough that people share it with each other and tell each other about it. And there's no other, we haven't come up with any other. So if you know of like some silver bullet to get in front of more eyeballs, like we're also not the most social media friendly content because it's a subscription. Right. So it's although actually some of my colleagues are still they're quite popular. Like Kate Clark is very, very popular on Twitter, even though most of the links she posts are to us. So it is a challenge, but it's also like the formula is there. If you write something that has value, it's been like this consistent thing for 7 years. There's no it's good. Like it works. It has worked. It continues to work in exactly the same way that it did on day one. So I'm probably not smart enough to know what else we could be doing with franchises like that. But
I'm curious how you. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. The event is a good idea. We actually we do have a startups focused event that's virtual that's happening in a week. But it's not actually tied to this feature. We were thinking about doing it as that, but like we didn't think that we get enough like without big names for a event, we didn't think we would be able to get people to sign up and want to join. So we ended up going a little bit more traditional and like bringing in people like, Marissa from, Google Yahoo and like Eric Schmidt and like, yeah, we have a few from like the list, like the Cameo CEO and David Barrett from Expensify, people like that. But we didn't want to do what you talked about because we couldn't figure out how that would be attractive to enough people beyond the written content. So if you have an idea that you think,
I think that really would be though. Like I feel like just in the last 2 weeks, we've just been talking to so many different investors and kind of like people in the startup ecosystem, partially because of this lunch break thing we're doing. But I feel like the top of mind question for everyone is where do we find these internet watering holes, which are like the secret Slack group or Discord or whatever, where now everyone is remote. And someone used this phrase that like 50% of startups will be in Silicon Valley and the other 50 will be in the cloud somewhere. And I have to find where they are. I think Ray said that on Monday. Right. But I mean, this something like what DK was saying, or an event kind of centered around these like 50 most promising startups, I think would be so intriguing to all of these investors who are like, okay, where are these people even collecting? Because it's so distributed right now. It might actually be interesting marketing, I feel like. I mean, they would come, they'd probably be really intrigued. I mean, if they're not already subscribers, probably want to subscribe and could pull other people into something like this.
Yeah, again, we talked a lot about it. We decided ultimately against that. But I'm really actually struggling with like the notion of events and what the future holds. My boss is pretty bullish on virtual events, but I'm not as much. I don't think there's a substitute for the kind of networking that you get when everyone's in a room. Certainly for. Yeah, so I have a really hard time.
So do you think post COVID, most of the world kind of flips back to the in-person events?
I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. I think it was probably that market was probably a little too inflated and wasteful. Most of that, I don't know. A lot of events depends on what kind of events. Like, I'm guessing Mobile World Congress, something like that, is actually quite useful to a lot of people and is necessary. In terms of like developer events, I think developer events have been great virtually. Like if you're just a developer and you're trying to figure out how to use different platforms and tools, like you could do that virtually. It's been awesome. I think, right?
I'm wondering, are there, like, I think when you mentioned Mobile World Congress, I'm thinking, whatever, it's tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of like, work, let's say. And I wonder if there's, and I think getting the same experience of that thing online, it feels like it'd feel thin relative to that. But I wonder if there was like this, look, if the information we put together, these 50 companies, and these are the ones that, these are the most interesting things, and this is why we think they're interesting. And if you just have like a moment, maybe you invite, a few of the people on to each talk about what they're doing for a few minutes. And then you kind of like create a moment where, I would guess like the broad internet is interested in like what Silicon Valley is doing, especially if curated by a trusted brand like The Information. And so can you then take all the work you did and just create more of a moment to draw people in? So I think it's not like World Congress, kind of scale. It sort of doesn't need to be or intend to be, but take all the work you already did, like the hard work of identifying and using your network to filter and curate, and then just say, look, it's going to be like lightweight, low key, and we're going to have, out of the 50, we're going to have the founders of the top 10 show up, and each person's going to, give a little back and forth for a few minutes, and then, we'll just make it a moment. And maybe it's free to attend, but it gives, it's basically free to attend and roughly free to produce, because you've kind of already done the work. You're sort of just repurposing or drafting off of stuff you've done, and then it maybe just creates a huge community that has additional touch points, with the brand and with the content.
Yeah, it's a good idea. We struggle with the free. Nothing's ever free. I mean,
Right.
even
Yep.
like
Yep.
Hopin is not free, and the people who are coordinating for us on staff, coordinating all the speakers and different things, like that's not free. So we can't exactly afford to do things for free, or necessarily want to, when we kind of want to do things that people are willing to pay for, because they want to, because they're actually getting value from it. So it's worth thinking about. It's definitely worth thinking about. I appreciate
I certainly don't mean to
we're
suggest
just throwing all these ideas.
Please be my consultant.
Please
be my media consultant. Well, what do you got? So, all right. So your end goal is what? Where do you take things next?
Well, you mean with Highlighter?
Mm-hmm.
So we've been pretty deep on building this for most of the last year, call it, because it's a kind of a heavy lift of an endeavor. And during that time, we've been kind of running our own discussions and using initially kind of Zoom, and then eventually the Highlighter platform. But it feels like there's a lot of energy among us, even just to like use this and create this way. And we stream these out to YouTube, and we create YouTube videos out of it. So we actually create it's like a new, easier way for us to create than any of the other tools that we could use to do similar. So, our plan.
You're trying to create the watering hole that you talked about, Mishti. Is that it too?
I think there could be lots of different watering holes. I mean, like the whole genesis, as DK was saying, we started hosting all these town halls with authors, and there was just so much momentum around like gathering these people in one place where they could like get up and ask their idol author a question live on stage. And like beyond that, we started discovering that there was so much that had never been written about that just came out in these conversations. Like someone would ask some interesting question, and then author would start talking about like when they were 5, blah, 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 like these stories that no one has written about and uncovered before. Kind of to your point, actually, about like how do you unearth new information? A lot of it is so much through conversation, right? Like if you're doing a profile on someone, you probably want to shadow them for a while and just kind of like pick up what you pick up. So then thinking about how do we make it more seamless to host these very like participatory conversations, almost like DK said, it's like TV show in your browser. I mean, if people showed up, we could invite them on stage. They could start jamming with you about the future of journalism or whatever. But then you could glean out the best parts with highlights after the fact. So, I mean,
okay.
Effectively, it helps new information get out into the world by the process of like us just showing up and discussing it. And I think we used to get a lot of that. It's almost like a new way to learn, or a new way to sort of educate yourself about something that you might be interested in. Is just get some people who care about it and want to talk about it, and then by being able to highlight from that, we actually can kind of surface it in the world in a way that doesn't really exist today.
But are these just to be clear? So like when I say new information, I mean, I'm talking about a particular set of new information, not like something that, not necessarily something from somebody's biography from when they were growing up, although that is actually quite valuable depending on the person. But we're like news people. So we're trying to figure out kind of like what's going on behind the scenes now. So when you're bringing people together, what's the new information you're trying to unearth? Is it, because like, and I'm just thinking again, like, are you trying to unearth new, like, verifiable facts, or is it just like frameworks for how to think about what's happening in the world? Like, I
think there's flavors of each. So I think throughout this discussion, we've been hanging out here, for I guess most of the last hour or so. I think through this discussion, I think we're learning about your perspective on media and organizations and independent voices, and that just helps shape our worldview. So I think there's that level of new information that, like, if if we asked you to write a blog post about it, it would have been this, okay, let me think about it, and I don't have time, and I need to do this. But we can just hang out and talk. We actually learn things from each other, and I think those things help us shape our own worldviews. So that's...
they might, if you agree. You might not necessarily agree.
I think it's fine if we disagree.
Yeah.
Like I proposed that you should have an event series, and you said, no way. And that's totally fine.
No, I am not. Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm definitely not going to dismiss any of your suggestions. I'm not a product savant like you guys. So I
don't know if anyone is that, but that's kind of this idea of like, if you're a researcher, even if you're like an academic researcher at a university, before you write a journal article for submission, you're like having all of these individual phone calls with like the top 10 people in your field, trying to bounce ideas off of them. And those are all completely in private. No one else besides you can learn from them. Then you publish this thing in like a very selective kind of format that only a couple eyes ever read. So then imagine instead of, it could be the same academic, but it could be someone thinking about how to build their startup, or someone thinking about the next blog post they want to write. This whole like working in public, you can think about writing in public. Mm-hmm. So if all of those conversations were happening in public where other people could also come and ask. So we started hosting these like thought lab type conversations the last 2 weeks with people who had written really long form blog posts on a topic and then wanted to maybe take them forward. So that's kind of, I think, what we mean by like learning through conversation, where before it's very private, one-to-one. I
see. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. How do you feel like? Sorry, it's just so zeitgeisty. But how do you feel like Clubhouse fits into that idea? Is that similar or not? Not really.
But yeah, I think Clubhouse certainly gets people talking, and that is one form of bringing out new information. So I think they do that. I think it certainly. I think whenever you get people together, you end up kind of get people talking, get people learning. So I think that's, it's an example of how this can be done. I think we sort of, started these on Zoom, and we were recording them and publishing them to YouTube. And so I think the actual tooling that we need to host the kinds of things we want are much different than kind of how we would be able to do that on Clubhouse. So I think it's a different set of tooling. But I think, whenever you get people together talking, whether it's in real life or on a Zoom or on a Clubhouse or here, I think there's, new information that surfaces. And I think probably I was just going to add some color to the comment that Mishti was making, which is, I think when we say information, we probably mean something that's like a lower stakes, maybe higher volume, lower quality information than when you would use the phrase. Meaning the average quality may be much lower, but there may be some gems in there.
Or it's just something that's like a evergreen thing about like how to build a software product, and just something basic, a fundamental. Go ahead, please.
If you think about early internet, right? Like somebody would make a web page about something that they care about, and they sit down and they get a domain, and they try to install some blogging software on their own thing, and then they can finally write about their hobby or passion. It could be knitting or kiting or gardening, whatever. And I think early internet, it was really hard to express that way, right? And so it's sort of, obviously decades have gone by, and we can easily blog and we can easily tweet. But I would still guess that 90% of human knowledge does not live on the internet today.
Yeah.
And we're really far along in the internet, right? Like call it 30-ish years. And most human knowledge doesn't exist on the internet. Yet we have, search engines and social networks, and we have a lot of information flowing through, but we don't really have as much structure to that. And so we believe that we can actually create a lot more structure and value to that information by, knowing, like there's actually a lot of signal in just the stuff we did today. Like look at in the chat, Mishti shared the network.com, which is a link that I didn't know about until this conversation. Right. And the fact that Mishti shared it and the fact that you said it, that's a lot of signal. Right. So you think about like all the quality signal in the fact that you said it and Mishti linked it there.
Totally. Although I don't know if it's a good company.
No, that's totally fair. Totally fair.
I have no idea.
At least intriguing. Yeah.
It would be tough for somebody who wanted to promote disinformation or fake news to get you to talk about it and to get Mishti to link it. Those are really, really strong signals that just aren't surfaced in the world today.
Understood. Yeah, you should have Adam D'Angelo pop up for lunch and talk about this.
Right.
I'm sure he'd love to do that.
That's a topic that they care about deeply at Quora. Yeah, they've been fascinated with that for a decade, right?
Yeah. No, sorry. I keep like looking in different directions because I don't. That's how you're getting me to think about different things. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, totally.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I'm glad I signed up. I'm glad I'm part of the.
Yeah, thanks for coming by.
Hello. Yeah, of course. This is a rare treat to have this period in the middle of the day where I'm not getting like 1,000 emails.
Right.
Although I should actually go. So,
sure. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been fascinating. I'm glad we got a chance to catch up a little bit and then hear
so many cool ideas.
I'm
really glad you came.
So many things. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, Mishti.
So.
And David, I might follow up. I might want to. If you have time, I might would love for you to connect with one of my colleagues to help.
Yeah, sure.
Through some adjacent topics.
I'd love to
trying to work through. But okay, cool, awesome, great to meet you, Mishti. Thank you, DK, and
thanks,
I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah.
See ya. Yeah.
Right. Bye. See you.
All right. That was fun.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's like I thought you had taken you'd taken a highlight of the Nathan discussion we were having, and I thought you tweeted the highlight, and then I thought Amir was coming to say, whoa, let me tell you.
Yeah, I thought he came because of the highlight as well, but it's pretty awesome that he just like found out about this.
Cruising around. Okay. I guess I have it on
stitching together these topics and themes.
Yeah.
Like it's so amazing to see it play out in real life.
Yeah. So I think I have it. I need to check because I think I have the Discover page linked from my Twitter. Is that right? I think we did that a while back, if I remember.
Oh, is it? I linked it on the Highlight Ideas Twitter. Is it on yours? Okay.
Yes, it looks
Highlighter.com
like
is. Oh, does that take
it? I don't know. I'm going to check it now that we're talking about it. It's a short URL, and it seems to go to Discover through Twitter.
We're logged in, probably.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of a miss, right? We should.
Oh, yeah, you should link yours to Discover as well.
Yeah, let me do that right now before I forget. Because if I don't do it now, I will forget. Okay, there it is. I actually have a private call I have to take in 15 minutes.
Okay.
So maybe we should wrap lunch break. I still
Yeah.
haven't eaten my bowl of blueberries and banana are only half eaten.
Oh my God, finish them before your call for sure.
Awesome. Well, this has been fun as always, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Sounds good. All right, see ya.